So, I'm terrified for a whole host of reasons. One, because you could have John O'Brien here. So Tim Keiltyn, John O'Brien, bad choice. I'm also terrified because I live in a part of the UK called Geordie Land, where we often have subtitles when Geordies are speaking on English television, right? So the translators have got a very, very hard job. I'm also slightly terrified because I looked back on my presentation and it was a whole host of cartoons that I had made. So last night I got back to the hotel and thought I better make me presentation better, and I ended up making another cartoon, right? So probably very difficult to translate cartoons as well. So through the very brief discussions of what I could offer today, was a bit of a worker's perspective, and I think I'm interested in the structural stuff and how systems are organised. As time's gone on, I've become a little bit less interested in that, and I suppose what I'm interested in is what's possible, right? So I've been involved in loads of pilots. You're in pilot phase now. I would advise you to just pretend you're in a pilot all the time, because loads of exciting stuff happens in pilots, and then it becomes kind of a bit boring and things get squashed a bit. So I'm just going to talk, and somebody just say stop when I've finished talking, right? So one of the things that I hear a lot of is that there's these people who get self-directed support, and there's these people who don't. So there's good people in the system, and there's bad people in the system. Like it's this lightsaber duel between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader, right? And then I go to see workers, and they're all really canny, they're all good, so there's not many bad people around, right? What I do see is lots of workers who are just getting squashed, right? So there's good people getting squashed. So social workers in the UK kind of want to do really good work, but something about the bureaucracy and the rules and the regulations squash them, right? So I suppose what I've been trying to do over the last few years is how can we unsquash people? If self-directed support's about social justice and liberating people, like Kate was saying about her workers, it's really hard to help support somebody's citizenship when you're going to a food bank. It's difficult, isn't it? So if we're liberating people, we'll also probably need to think about liberating workers a little bit. So I do think that that's where people are a bit stuck in this compactor. So I did some work in Scotland with looked after children, so children who've been removed from their families and placed a long way away from home. And one of the social workers in this pilot said, this is about getting alongside people and families, believing things can be different, and putting solutions in people's own control. And I reckon that's really true. That was true before personal budgets came along. It's true now, I reckon. So I always remember that one. And then a lush quote that this stuff is, I think, is a philosophy, not a technology, right? It's a way of thinking, a way of approaching things rather than some kind of mechanisms, and I'll talk about mechanisms a little bit as well. So I love this triangle, right? So when I'm doing my work, Heather Simmons, a colleague of ours in Scotland, came up with this triangle to kind of describe person-centred planning. So I think the values are the fundamental part. The values are the stuff that makes work, make it work for us and make it work for people. So in my values, when I'm approaching this work, it's the point of it is social justice. If we forget that, it becomes a mechanism. And I reckon that's about honesty, trust and transparency, a belief in people and their capacities, and a willingness to let go of control and foster it in others. That's what I reckon. So the big kind of foundation is the values. The next bit of the triangle is the approaches, so I reckon that's how you demonstrate your values, by the conversations you have in people's front rooms, and I think that's about how you follow through on your actions and promises, and about the personal accountability you've got and the connection you've got with people, right? So that's how, if I was supporting somebody, hopefully they would say, yes, you can tell that Tim believes the stuff in the bottom part of the triangle because he demonstrates it in the way that he works with us. And then the tiny bit of the triangle at the top is the mechanics. So I call them mechanics, which is, in the UK, we had things called resource allocation systems. Simon's since apologised for them. I don't think it's a bad idea, a way of figuring out how people get their fair slice of the pie, of the money that's available for support. But the conversations in the UK when we started self-directed support was about which version of the RAS are you using? We're on version 4.2, or it just became, the conversations are about the mechanics rather than about the purpose of doing it. In Scotland, they've got option 1, option 2, option 3, option 4. Loads of the conversations are about options. Not many of the conversations are about what's the point of this work. This is a new cartoon I made last night. This is kind of what's happened in the UK. Here it is, version 6 of our new personal budgets process. Something really complicated that kind of nobody can follow. Kate was saying a bit of that before. However the mechanics are developed in Finland, I reckon there's still possibility to do stuff, right? If it's really complicated, the system's really complicated, you've got less chance of getting caught. That's what I think, because there's so many rules that nobody knows which one you've broken. Ideally, it'd have as few rules as possible to allow loads of flexibility. Am I making sense to people? Yes? Okay. Okay. I'm not going to do that one. I think one of the biggest things that hinder good work before and after personal budgets is, I call them service line goggles, right? So you kind of go to work, or workers go to work, and they get their little badges on, and they forget that they're a human being. Does that happen to anybody? You're not going to admit to it, but you kind of come up with service solutions, don't you? So somebody's got a problem. The best example of this is really recently, I was working with a young man who's got a personal budget, not a big one, and he wanted to get a job, right? And I went down the route of, I work for a support organisation as well. Well, which workers have we got that are really good at helping people get jobs? Who's done the systematic instruction training? And I kind of got a bit stuck. And then I thought, he wanted a job in a cafe, so then I took my service line goggles off and I thought, I'll just go to some cafes and say, if I give you 50 quid, will you give this lad a job, right? And the first coffee I went to said, I would, but I'm closing. And then he said, but Paula at Pulp Fiction, she might say yes. So I went to see Paula at Pulp Fiction, said, hiya Paula, I'm Tim, work with this lush lad, wants a job. If we give you 50 quid, will you give him a job? You can pay him if you want to out of that money, or you can just put it in the till. And she said, yes. And I was like, isn't that amazing? So this lad now has got a job. Paid job. All I did was ask a cafe. We charge a little bit of his budget to kind of manage that stuff. But if I hadn't remembered that I had service line goggles on, he would still be on the waiting list for an employment support worker, who would probably only be a barrier to employment, right? So, as well as doing stupid cartoons, I do write serious things, so I'm vaguely serious. So some of this work around the looked after children stuff is probably, people find it really interesting, but my point about it is that people are just people, right? So children in care are just children. The same approach, the same way of working, the same focus on social justice, the same person-centered approach that we use with those people. It's the same whether you're a child, whether you're a looked after child, whether you're a child with a disability, whether you're an older person, whether you've got mental, that people are just people, aren't they? Okay. So, the biggest bit of work was a little bit of work in Middlesbrough. Middlesbrough's in the northeast of England, a bit further south than me. We did work over a few years. And a report was kind of pulled together after 2.5 years, I think. And the headlines of that report are, guess what? Focusing on people's capacities really works. If you focus on what people have got to offer, what skills, gifts and talents they've got, it's dead successful, right? We worked with 114 children over 4 years. Some of those children kind of dropped out of the program. Some of them weren't really like good referrals, if that makes any sense, so the situation they're in. Anyway, so of the 72 children that we worked with and were kind of fully involved in it, these are children who've been removed from their families and sent to a residential placement, so like an institution. Of the 72 children we work with, 55 of those people, those young people, are successfully at home with their families who they were removed from a long time ago. The average cost of a placement in Middlesbrough is £96,000 a year. And as Simon says, the only benefit of Brexit is that it makes the conversion from euros to pounds really straightforward. So that's 96,000 euros a year. The average cost of a plan that we were doing in Middlesbrough is £6,464 a year. The same children, just using the mechanisms and principles of self-directed support to make that happen. So you haven't got John O'Brien, but you've got a picture of John O'Brien and one of John O'Brien's perfect quotes. So this is what I use in my head all the time to kind of remind us of what I should be doing when I'm at work. And this quote is, listen deeply, search for capacities, seek connections, and be open to yes. And I think that is really true. That kind of sums up all that thinking, all that work around person-centered planning. I think it does. I love it. So that's in my head. when I was asked to do this work in Middlesbrough, I thought, I better do some reading about looked after children, I better do some research. I turned up at people's houses with a big roll of paper and me flip-flops and me coloured pens and discovered that that's not what they wanted. But that quote kind of stuck, and that's been the guide for us, really. What I think we're still stuck in is, I call it placementitis, and that probably is not very translatable at all. But if you went to a doctor and you said, I've got a really good solution for this young person, it's a placement in Dunoon, which is a long way away from Middlesbrough, the doctor would kind of prescribe you something for that because it's a silly thing to do, right? This relies on a bit of knowledge of geography, and if you imagine that the UK was a huge place, right? But Whitley Bay, it's where I live. It's got a sign which says Whitley Bay. Middlesbrough, where the first young person I worked with in Middlesbrough, is about 50 miles south of Whitley Bay. So she used to live in Middlesbrough. She was placed in a children's home in Dunoon, right? And our social worker was a fantastic worker, good at social work but bad at geography. So she said, Dunoon's not very far, you just drive to Carlisle and turn right. which is really true, it's geographically correct. So I know where Carlisle is, it's a town I know pretty well, so I got in the car, went to Carlisle, put my sat-nav on when I got to Carlisle, and it said something like 4.5 hours remaining, which is a long drive. I had to ring the placement and say, I'm going to be about 4 hours late, and yes, anyway. So, but that struck me as mad, right? There's a young girl who's struggling with life in Middlesbrough, and the service solution is to send her to Dunoon. I'm not disrespecting Dunoon because it's a beautiful place, right? It doesn't quite look like that now, but you've got to get a ferry to get there. So that there might be some thinking in, might be a good place to send young people, right? Anyway, I'm not going to talk about that either, right? But I suppose, but actually, is that not just really mad? And I live in another kind of faded seaside town, which has also got like lots of old hotels, and there's loads of young people, vulnerable people are kind of placed in Whitley Bay because there's the capacity. Anyway, so I suppose when I started this work with Looked After Children, these are the kind of conversations I found myself involved in, right? And I still think they happen, still hear them, I'm still part of them now. So this is a mother, attending a meeting with us fantastic workers and services. So the number one, she says, I'll tell you what would really help me and my family. One of the workers says, that's not what we normally do. That's not possible. Another worker says, so apart from the thing which would really, really help, what else can we do? And then we offer, with Looked After Children, it was a parenting program. So it must be because you're not, the reason you're having difficulties is not because there's any external things wrong, it's because you're not very good parents, so that's the kind of off-the-shelf solution, right? You can kind of change that number 4 solution for a whole host of service solutions, right? So, the work in Middlesbrough was a pilot, but what we were doing was just self-directed support. What I think is really important about the work in Middlesbrough was that it was a pilot with real money. So there wasn't a budget created, the self-directed support budget. The money that was used was the money that we would have spent on placements, right? So if you're doing pilots, make sure you're using proper money, not creating a little budget. So, there's already a bit of work being done around what were the criteria might be for young people to be involved in this. So the idea was that it would be safe and in their interest to return them home. There's a bit of a check out of whether returning people home was safe. Some of the thought around whether it would be safe to return children home was not about would it be safe to return them with no change whatsoever. It would be safe to return them with some significant support in place, right? You get a different kind of answer if you think about it that way. That the young people would be willing to work towards that, so I wasn't going around like the Pied Piper of Middlesbrough kind of bringing children home who don't want to come home. The families would be willing to work towards achieving this, and the other people in their lives kind of thought it was a good idea. So they had a strong steering group, some fantastic social workers, and a pretty good no-nonsense approach to personal budgets. So the first young person we worked with, she's called Amy because she wanted to be anonymous, but she's since allowed us to use a real name. So a young woman called Joanna. Joanna at the time was 14 years old, entered the Looked After system when she was very young. She'd always maintained contact with her mum. At the age of 12, following yet another placement breakdown, Amy found herself in a residential children's home in Middlesbrough. Joanna said, I hated it. I didn't like some of the staff who worked there. I did like some of them. I liked the kids, but it was strict. Joanna's response to being unhappy was to kick back against the service. One of those fantastic people who kind of don't accept what's on offer, they kind of fight against it. As a result of that, she started to gather a bit of a reputation. It became more difficult for the staff in the home to support her, but during that time she still maintained loads of contact with her mum, Tanya, so they still had a bit of a relationship there. So Joanna used to tell the staff at the residential home that she was going out to see her friends, but she'd sneak off to see her mum. Tanya, who's Joanna's mum, said the staff had phoned me up and asked me to speak to her to calm her down or persuade her to go to school. It was like being a mum at the end of the phone. So after a series of incidents, Joanna was arrested by the police and returned to her mum's house because the children at the staff at the residential home wouldn't refuse to take her back because her behaviour was so bad, right? That's what they were saying. If I explain a little bit about, just really briefly, when people have got a reputation, like whatever you do becomes magnified, right? So when Joanna was arrested by the police, she wasn't charged, but she was kind of accused of false imprisonment because she pushed a member of staff into a cupboard and shut the door, right? And I've met that member of staff. That was a pretty rational response to the city. Like, I think she was put her in the cupboard because if she was not in the cupboard, something worse will happen. So she pushed a member of staff in the cupboard. And she was also accused of criminal damage, right? Because she was throwing stuff at the staff's cars in the car park, which is not nice, is it? It's not the kind of thing it's not a good behaviour to foster. So she was criminal damage. When I tell you what she was throwing at the staff cars was mushrooms, right? You've got to throw them pretty hard, or they've got to be really big to cause damage, right? But I suppose because of that's kind of, anyway. So the staff at the home wouldn't take her because the behaviour was so bad. The police asked her, where else can we take you? And she said, me mum's, so she ended up at her mum's, right? It was a Friday afternoon, which is the worst thing for things like that to happen. 3:30 on a Friday afternoon. The call was out all over the UK for a placement as the solution for Joanna. They tried Dunoon, that was full. So the social worker had the option of, we'll find another placement or we'll try something different. So the social worker decided to engage this project called Returning Children to Middlesbrough to use this idea of self-directed support, use this idea of working with Joanna and her family to figure out who they are, what they've got to offer, what their capacities are, how they could use resources in a way that made loads of sense for them. This is 3 months after Joanna ended up at home, right? This is a picture that Joanna made for Emma, one of the team in Middlesbrough, and it says, to Emma, thank you for all the help you've given me and me mum. I hope you like your cakes. Love, Joanna, right? The staff who knew Joanna in Middlesbrough, she's had a big reputation, were saying that is not the same person, that she is not capable of making that little picture, baking cakes, right? So 3 months on, already had quite a big impact. When we'll tell you what solutions, what led to the real success of Joanna returning home. Some of it was just about spending a bit of time with them, figuring out who they were, what they've got to offer, all that kind of straightforward, searching for capacities, seeking connections, all that stuff. Some of the stuff that was spent was Joanna, hobbies, interests, passions, loves horse riding, right? So it's not a big thing. Bought some horse riding equipment, jodhpurs and things, and that kind of stuff, right? So she could go to the local stables and not feel out of place, right? The housing situation that Mum was in was horrific, and she was trapped in that kind of vicious cycle of she had some rent arrears, and she couldn't move until she paid the rent arrears off. So we used Joanna's personal budget to pay off the rent arrears, which caused a bit of a stir at the time, especially when you think you're paying one branch of Middlesbrough Council with the same money. It's the same money. So Newcastle, she owes Middlesbrough Council rent, Middlesbrough Council Children's Services pay that out of it anyway. But that meant that they could move over time into a much, much better place. They bought a dining room table because they didn't have one in the house. And some support. So they bought a bit of support, and the support was tailored to who Joanna is, what her hobbies, interests, passions, and all that sort of stuff. So she got support from a young woman called Devon, who's also into horse riding. Isn't that amazing? It's not very complicated or scientific, so Devon really likes horse riding. Joanna could go to the stables with Devon. Over time, Joanna doesn't go with Devon anymore, she just goes by herself. Joanna likes mucking out. Do people know what that is? Clearing the poop out of the stables. The job that nobody else does. She says, I can put my music on and I can just dig poo, right? She loves it. That is a really valuable and valued contribution to her local stables because she's doing the job that nobody else wants to do. There wasn't anything other like majorly dramatic. One of the things that Joanna used some of her money for, Joanna and her mum used some of their budget for, was they wanted to go on holiday, right? So they hadn't been on holiday anywhere far away. So what they decided to do was go on holiday just to a local caravan park, like not very many miles away on the coast, went to a caravan park, and they wanted some support to go with them, right? And what the support worker says, it was fantastic, but it was also heartbreaking, right? Because Joanna and her mum have been apart for so long, and they haven't had much quality time together, I don't think. They lived in quite a bit of poverty. They arrived at this caravan park, sat in the caravan, and kind of looked at each other, and the mum said, what do we do now? Like, we're here on holiday. What do you do when you're on holiday? When I heard that, I was crying, right? So they don't know what to do. Never kind of experienced that stuff. So the worker was like, shall we get some cards, or we'll go for a walk, or we'll go for an ice cream, or we'll play Monopoly, or whatever that was. Okay, so before that little bit of work and a relatively small amount of money, Joanna was developing an enhanced reputation. She was running out of placements and options. She had predicted U grades at GCSE, so our kind of 16-year-old exams. A U grade means it's not worth marking, basically, ungraded. She herself said that her next logical step was a young offenders institution. That's where she felt she was going. A childhood in care and a future as a care leaver. So that's where she saw herself, everybody else saw herself. After that, building a positive reputation, happily, sometimes still precariously at home, so things at home with mum weren't perfect still, but that's what the support was there to make sure that kind of worked. Building a new positive circle of friends. She got loads of C's at GCSE when she sat at GCSEs, which is amazing. Everybody around her was saying that's amazing. She's attending college and planning her next steps in life as a young adult, right? I think that's pretty amazing. Don't know if anybody else thinks that's pretty amazing. For a relatively small outlay of money, I did this bit. I'm not really interested in saving the local authority money. I'm interested in making sure that loads of money isn't wasted, right? So this is after 10 months of Joanna being at home, the council would have happily spent, not happily, but they would have spent £120,000 in 10 months on her placement, right? And instead, they spent £11,960 over those 10 months. Bearing in mind, a big chunk of that was paying off rent arrears, right? That's, in 10 months, that's £108,000, euros. A lot of money, one person. If you think about that over, this was 4 years on, we did that sum. One young person, 582,000 euros. That's a lot of money, isn't it? Again, I'm not particularly interested in saving it. What kind of time am I now? 15 minutes left. God, I better be quick. I'm not going to talk about that, right? Should I? No, I'm not going to. When people say, like, it's not that complicated, is it? Good work isn't all that complicated. Do you think? Is it complicated? Like, that was this other young person who was described as the most complicated young person in Middlesbrough. I was thinking, oh God, there's loads of pressure. I've got to do some amazing work. And I thought, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just do what I normally do. I'll just ask her and her family, get a group of people around her, and I'll ask her some really good questions like, who are you? Like, if you're going to describe yourself really well, and she said, I am a 15-year-old legend, right? And I thought, isn't that a lush way to describe yourself? So that's exactly what was written. That was on the front page of her plan. Like, please release some resources for this 15-year-old legend, right? It's difficult to say no to that. What are your hobbies, interests, skills, and passions, right? Just that stuff. What do you bring? The people around her were amazing. Like, she's a thinker and a listener. She's got that natural thing with children, right? Those kind of, if you're not looking for capacities, you won't find that stuff, will you? She's volunteered, blah, 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 right? I'm not going to talk about it. People sometimes really like those creative solutions, right? But there's a bit of a creativity trap, I think. One of the first people Simon worked with using individual service funds, one of their solutions was the caravan, right? So getting a caravan was a really good solution. Colleague Kelly and I worked with some family in Newcastle, and one of their solutions was to get a caravan, use some of the budget to buy a caravan so they could have a break. So I work in Newcastle but live in North Tyneside, two neighbouring local authorities, and seriously the conversation in North Tyneside was, Newcastle have got a caravan story. We've got to have a caravan. We've got to have a caravan story. It was mad, wasn't it? That pilot phase of people coming so I can imagine somebody saying, I know you don't like caravans, but the social worker said it was a good use of a personal budget, right? So that's a bit of a warning from the UK, right? So this stuff isn't complicated, right? If we break it down to, I think one of the beauties of Simon's innovations, right, is that they were really deeply thought out, simple things. So the deep thought led to something fairly simple, like give people the money up front, do a bit of planning with them, let them crack on with it. That's probably far too simplistic. But I suppose, it's not far, is it? Yeah. And I suppose that John O'Brien stuff, should we do the 14, we were talking about person-centred planning training when we used to do it. Should we do that 7-day person-centred planning training? Or should we boil it down a little bit, the stuff that really works, so that listen deeply, search for capacities, seek connections, be open to yes. I think that's a perfect sentence which describes our stuff. So, search for capacities in young people and families, or people you're working with in the communities they belong to. I'm not going to go through that because I haven't got time. Some of that stuff, so if you're searching for capacities, this was a Lush family again in Middlesbrough, whose young lad was on the verge of returning home. I was doing a bit of work with the family, and the issue was the dad and the son kind of clashed really badly. And when I spent a bit of time with the son, what I figured out was that he wanted to be his dad, basically it. So I was just asking the dad, what are the best times you had together? So when he was at home, before he went away, what were the best times you had together? He said, we used to do like stock car racing, like banger racing. We used to go racing on a Sunday, and all Saturday would be in the garage, covered in oil, tinkering about with the engines. So when's the last time you did that? Oh, about 5 years ago, which was about fit the time scale of when it all kind of broke down. So what would it take to do that again? The dad said, well, the engine went in the car, and it costs about 400 quid to get a new one. I reckon 400 quid on an engine for that is a pretty good use of resources. Do you reckon? Because God knows how much a parenting class would, that was a solution on offer. Like, the problem is your relationship with your son needs some therapy, and you need to do a parenting class, when actually what they need to do is get an engine off eBay so they can go banger racing again. It might not be as simple as that, but often it is. I'm not going to talk about that particularly. John O'Brien again, that's 3 pictures of John O'Brien. I think you've got your money's worth now. But that idea that actually communities are reservoirs of hospitality. So if we look for those solutions, like Joanna's horse riding, mucking out, right? If you don't look for that stuff, if you don't look for where she could make her contribution, you won't find it, right? If you believe that communities are really unwelcoming places, you won't find anything, right? So that, yes, definitely. So search for capacities in people, communities, seek connections wherever those connections are, be open to yes, right? So I translate that into Geordie as don't take no for an answer, right? That's about tenacity. It's about creating a compelling human story to release resources, I reckon. On that other plan, I am a 15-year-old legend. It's hard to say no to that. It might be difficult to squeeze into the portal and NDIS, but it's a point. Anyway, I'm not going to do that either. So one of the questions, so I suppose when I'm in people's front rooms, or when I've done this alongside workers, there's loads of fantastic workers who I've worked with in Scotland particularly, who they just need a bit of support to do this stuff. And once they feel that they can do it, that they're allowed to do it, they do amazing stuff, right? So one of the questions I've kind of drilled into them a little bit is, what would it take? So a good question to ask. Like, what would it, you used that question before as well, Kate, didn't you? So what would it take for you to feel more able to cope? What would it make to make the mornings easier? What would it take to get you to school? I'll come back to that in a minute. And what are you going to do? This is not us as a system doing stuff to you. It's about us doing stuff together, hopefully, right? So these are 2 fantastic examples of asking people what would it take. So what's your unique solution for your support needs, right? I was working with one family, 2 kids, who lived 2 young children with autism, 3 children, really chaotic household. One child had already been removed, chaos. I spent a bit of time with that family. I did some lush planning where we had a big community centre, loads of bits of paper on the wall. And one of the massive issues was the teenage daughters wouldn't get up in the mornings, right, for school. The mums' anxiety levels would raise. It would all just go horribly wrong, right? So I was asking the young people, what would it take to get you to school? That's a big thing that you can be responsible for, right? And one of the young people said, I know, Tim, a levitating UFO alarm clock, right? They exist because I found them, right? It's probably not on the pricing schedule of the NDIS either. You probably can't get them. It's not a budget line item. You get them on eBay and they're £9.89 each, right? And the idea is the alarm goes off, that helicopter thing takes off and flies around the room, and the noise doesn't stop. It's a horrific noise, doesn't stop until you put that thing back in the unit, right? Isn't that lush? Two of them, €18, €18, right? That might, it was quite, that's not what we spend my money on usually. If that works, £18. If it doesn't work, £18, right? Lush solution. The best answer to that question ever was Joanna. Joanna's issues was she didn't go to school, she wouldn't go to school, right? So I asked Joanna, going to school is a big issue. The bottom line is going to school is the law of the land, isn't it? If you don't go to school, it's bad. Bad things happen, right? So I asked her, what would it take to get you to school? She said, 20 quid, €20. What a fantastic answer. €20. So I was like, I could either just say no to that, because that's not what we do, or I could say, okay, how do I get Joanna 20 quid? So I said, the deal is I can't give you 20 quid to go to school because it's a law and you've got to go. The deal is you've got 20 quid to get to school. Right, so if you walk or you get the bus, or you get a taxi, you've got 20 quid. Oh, just a week, this is a week. So if you get a taxi, you'll have no money left at the end of the week. If you get the bus, you might have a little bit of money left at the week. Guess what you does? Guess what you did? Walk to school every day. 20 quid. That wasn't re-procuring the transport contract for Middlesbrough Council Special Educational Needs Children Transport budget, right? It was just, how can we get 20 quid to Joanna? How can we honour her unique solution? How can we trust her that that's a really good solution? I'm not going to talk about that one. So I suppose, search for connections, seek capacities, be open to yes. What have we got? So what have we got as a family, as a community, that real wealth stuff? What have we got available in terms of personal budget? What could we do together? So this is not us passing everything on to you. This is us working together to make that happen. What would it take to make it happen? And do we all trust each other? I reckon that's come up loads over the day. Is the trust there, right? You know that family, the 5 children, the levitating UFO alarm clocks, how are those young people going to know that I trust them, we trust them, the system trusts them? Get them the alarm clocks. I ordered them on my phone in the meeting, right? I'll get them sent to your address. So for young kids who aren't engaging in stuff, there's the system, listening to my own unique solution, making it happen really quickly. The risk is, it's 18 quid, right? And actually it was my risk because I bought it out of my account. It wasn't the local authority account, right? So the bit of a risk of me not getting £18 back. But that £18 is a massive, a huge impact, hasn't it, potentially? Once we've got all that kind of mechanics out of the way and we simplify stuff as much as possible, we can focus on the really important questions, right? The really important questions, whoever was speaking before said it, like, people don't ask for services, do the people generally describe what a good life might be? So what is that you want to do with this one wild, precious thing called your life? That is a lush question, isn't it? Complicated, hard question. And another big question, what might that look like for you? Rather than, what are you entitled to? I'm not going to talk about that either. So, us lot in the room, so us workers in the room, how many of us would welcome a parenting assessment? So can you imagine somebody coming to visit? I'm just going to come to assess your parenting. I'd be bloody terrified, me. An intervention. The system loves interventions, so I'll tell you what, I'm going to do some interventions on you today. You wouldn't welcome it. How many people would welcome a placement? I tell you, I really fancy living in a placement. I can't wait till I get in my placement, right? And I suppose I love this bloke called Father John Misty, probably a bit too much. I watch him on YouTube a lot, and my wife's saying, you love him, don't you? And I've said, yeah, I love him. Listen, no, so you really love him, Tim, don't you? But one of the quotes in a Father John Misty song is, I hate to say it, but each other's all we've got, right? There's just us. There's no good people, there's no bad people. We're just us as citizens, right? And how can we work together within a system which allows loads of flexibility to allow us to do that, to remember that there's just us? And then I reckon another really trite quote from Bob Dylan, who is really good as well. Bob Dylan song, all we need is honesty, a little humility and trust. And I reckon that's really true about the work we're embarking on now, we're kind of restarting now in Finland. There was loads of more really like deep and meaningful things I meant to say, which I wrote on there and forgot to pick up. So I think that's probably the end. Yes, that's the end. Definitely. Okay, thank you very much.